Hi, and welcome to this episode of the DC Life podcast. I'm Nathan.
I'm Georgie, and today we're going to chat with someone about something in the life of our church.
At the time of recording this episode, Matt Price was in Australia prior to the coronavirus restrictions coming in. Matt's now back in the United States, and we are waiting his and Tiffany's return to Australia in the Lord's time. Well, today we're joined in the studio with Matt Price. G'day, Matt.
Hello.
Can we hear a g'day?
I can't. I'm always nervous to go there with accents. It's just, I know my lane and my limits, and I like to, gotta stay in them.
So, Matt, you're on our staff page at DC as church planting pastor. So you're not from Australia. So can you tell us about a little bit about your story in coming to Australia, and then some bits of how did you meet God, like in your own country?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So I guess we'll go with the last one first. So I grew up going to a Catholic church. My mom was Catholic. Grew up in the Bible Belt in North Carolina on the east coast of the States. Dad grew up going to church till he was about 12, had enough of it, and then never really pursued that anymore. And met my mom, who's actually from the east coast of Canada, as heavy Catholic. Dad was in the military. He was up there serving, doing ice patrols. They met, got married. And so that really kind of shaped growing up what it looked like spiritually. So my mom had that influence. Young kid, I would go to Mass with her semi-regularly, definitely on Christmas and Easter. But one of the real turning points, I was probably maybe 8, 9, 10. I went to confession, and at that point I'm confessing like disrespectful to my parents and kind of those basic, I mean, they're sins, I would say, but kind of basic things that you know are wrong as a kid. But I didn't really have any teaching to know what was a sin, all that kind of spiritual framework and biblical framework, but just kind of that internal conscious of what was right and what was wrong. So I confess those things, and the priest is like, go say 3 Hail Marys, 3 this, 3 that, and then do 3 good deeds. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. I'll take that on, and really kind of trusted that process in a sense, at least in that moment. And so that later that week, I'm going on, just school and all that stuff, and have this in the back of my mind, and I see my mom making her bed, and so I'm like, oh, I can do one of my good deeds. I could go help her make the bed, and so go to grab the sheet to help her make the bed, and she just looks at me. She's like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "Oh, just helping you make the bed." And she was like, "I don't need your help." I was like, oh, okay, all right, whatever. I'll just go back to my room. That seemed a bit of a waste. And then later that day, or a couple day or two after, I saw her putting clothes on the clothesline outside, and so I was like, oh, I could go help her do one of my good deeds. And so I go out there to help her, and she's like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, I just want to help you." And she's like, "I don't need your help." And I was like, "Well, the priest told me I need to do 3 good deeds, and this is just not working." And that really, I can't remember what I said to her in that sense, but I just remember in that moment saying, "This is stupid. This is empty. This is a waste of my time." And I guess ultimately it's like, this just doesn't work. And so that really turned me off to the church, kind of turned me off to Christ, even though I didn't really know that at the time. But I guess just associated all that stuff together with that experience. I was just like, yeah, I'm done. And so probably for about the next 6, 7 years, up until I was 16, just threw my life into sport. Played baseball, soccer, and basketball just year round. Each season after season, and my dad coached me in all those sports, and so that really was sport was life. And then I got hurt. I wanted to play in university. I wanted to play professionally, baseball professionally, but I bought into that lie that if you work hard, you can do anything. And it's like, yes, but talent matters a lot. And so I had, a great work ethic on one level, but I just didn't have the talent. But I threw everything into it, then got hurt, and that really kind of shaped a season in a sense, where I just began to think about, okay, well, I don't have baseball anymore. What does life look like? What does dating look like? And then I met a girl, and
And it all changed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. One of the. Yeah, never mind. So she was, her dad was a pastor, really committed, the family just really committed to Christ in a really refreshing and authentic way. But that took time to kind of get to. So we started talking for a little while. I don't know, actually, this is, hopefully young people don't listen to this because this is the bad part about our story where it's like, oh, is that a non-Christian and a Christian dating? Because it often comes up, and I guess we would always say it's not ideal, but it worked out in the end. But I guess that's another story for another day. But yeah, so she began to try to talk to me about Christ because we began to get more serious in dating, and she knew that needed to be a priority, that it couldn't really go but so far if I wasn't a Christian. And I remember the first time she was like, oh, you need to read the Bible, or you need Jesus or something like that. And I just took the Bible and just chucked it across the room, walked out of the house and just kind of slammed the door. And that was kind of my first initial reaction to somebody who genuinely believed in Christ and was trying to share the gospel with me in a sense. But I think looking back, it was just that experience in the Catholic Church just coming out and I needed that looking back. I just needed to get somebody to take that blow of the just kind of foolishness or the faultiness of kind of that faith experience in the Catholic Church. And she was gracious to me and was there for me. And then my parents actually divorced when I was 13. And so it was a tough time in the sense my mom went one way, and then not too long after my dad went another. And so I'm about 15, 16, just like, okay, this is life. And that's when we started dating, and her family kind of took me in a sense. And that was probably a real turning point in the sense of them just loving me, and began to go to church eventually and saw that. I was like, oh, okay, church can be done differently than the Catholic Church. And the people there just really loved me and embraced me. And the pastor was just really good at just saying, just Christ, Christ alone. And it doesn't matter where you've come from, what you've experienced. And so over time, the Spirit was just really at work. And then I was just with Tiff one day and was like, hey, I want to give my life to Christ. And I was probably about 17 at that point. And so... yeah, that's, I guess, in a sense, how that happened. And then not too long, went to uni. Kind of uni was a bit of an up and down ride, a roller coaster. And then on the back end of that, had some hard times and was like, okay, I've got to figure this thing out. And so spent about a year or two, trying to figure out what does my faith look like in an everyday situation or in circumstances, and then eventually felt called to go to Bible college to become a pastor. And then that's where Tiff and I got married just after uni, went to Bible college, finished up there, went to the UK for a couple of years. Sorry, I'm getting to how we came here.
That's good.
Went to the UK for a couple of years, then went back to the States to work in a church plant. And we were in the church plant for about 6 months. And I remember Tiff, who I'm kind of the one that's just blown by the wind. I'm like, yeah, let's move here, let's move there, let's do this. My wife, not so much. She is a rock, set there, and it's like you got to do some work to move her. And it's really an act of God usually when she moves, and that's kind of it was actually telling because we'd had enough experiences together for me to know really my words have really no meaning on one hand when it comes to those things. Yeah. And when she says something, there's a bit more weight to it. Yeah. And so we were at the table, and she had actually just had a couple conversations of just kind of global ministry stuff with some of the people that she's close with. And I guess from her story, and that God was just really kind of stirring her heart to what it would look like to go back overseas. And when we went back to the States from the UK, we kind of had a 5-year plan, get financially viable, lay down some roots, and then kind of leave from a steady base. But that was more like a 5-month thing where none of that happened. No steady base, no steady financial circumstance. But yeah, so she kind of had that stirring in her heart, and then she didn't want to tell me because she knew once she said something, it was going to go somewhere. And I can't remember what happened. We were eating, and she just kind of came out and said something, and I was just about moving overseas or doing missions work, and it was just like, oh, okay, actually, if you're saying this off not any conversation that we've had recently. There's something to this. What's in it? And so we began to pray and just kind of throw on the table, where would we go? And English speaking was a kind of prereq for her. And again, the dreamer in me is like, oh, we can learn the language, but it's like, actually, no, she's right. Like English speaking works, and kind of Western context for a couple of reasons. She's celiac, which is kind of a weird thing on one level, but that plays a factor, or did play a factor for us of being in a Western country. That kind of is more common.
Yeah.
Although I guess a lot of Asian food is naturally gluten free on one level, but then you've got language barrier and other. And then even just for me, the spiritual context, like I really like being in a secular context. I think growing up in the Bible Belt, it's like I actually find it refreshing when people know they hate Jesus or know where they are with Jesus and don't want anything to do with it, than people who are like, oh, I love Jesus. And it's like, no, you really don't.
Yeah.
Like, and
pretending and
yeah. So that again, kind of shaping wanting to potentially be in a Western society to minister and to help people see that Jesus is relevant in life and the church does matter and it's significant and all those truths. And so, mom's from Canada. She's from Canada. We wanted nothing to do with Canada. It's too cold for too long. Beautiful country, but it just didn't really sense there, and didn't really sense going to the UK again. Had our time there. It was great. We loved it. And then you have some places like Singapore and some of those other places, India, and it just, again, I guess thinking Western context. And then it was like, well, what about Australia? And it was like, oh yeah, what about Australia? And then, so when we were in the UK, we worked with Rich, who is the lead planter at Nations Church.
Yeah.
And so this was in like late Jan, early Feb. And I was actually due to Skype him the next week before we had this conversation. And I was like, well, I think Rich is planning to go back. I'm due to Skype him next week. I can chat with him and say, hey, if we're going back to plant, what do you think about us joining? And so then that's where it went from there, and met Skype with Rich the next week. And he was like, hey, like that would be great. Do you have to go to assessment? So I think this was like early Feb. Assessment was like Feb 20 through 23rd, I think, whenever the annual conference is here.
this is Acts 29 we're talking about.
Yes, excuse me. Yeah, sorry. Yep.
Of which DC's a part, and Nations Church, our sister church.
Yes. Yeah. And the church we were part of in the UK was Acts 29 as well.
Yeah.
And I guess, for what it's worth, it has nothing to do with here, but the church that I was with in the US was Acts 29 as well. So getting assessed through Acts 29, and that was coming up in a few weeks, and he was like, look, got to go get assessed, see how that goes. That would be the first thing. And then it was just his family, taking time for his family to process what it would look like to move back to Australia, because they're from here, and they kind of went over indefinitely, and then it was like a 3 to 4 year plan, and so they had to still figure out what does this look like, and what does church planning look like. And so so there's probably about, I think they came back that October, I think, because it was funny because we thought, and maybe it may have been the next October. Actually, I think it was the October after that, because we thought we were potentially moving. So that January, whatever year it was, we thought that like next December, we were going to be moving, because we thought that October Rich was moving back. So we prepped before we talked to Rich to like plan to be moving in like a year. And that's what it was. And he was actually planning to move back the October of the next year. So it was like, okay, so this is like 2 years in the making. And so there was just kind of each step by step of just working out and just God kind of confirming and all those things coming into place. And then they moved in the following October, and then we moved over January 2019, a few months after they did.
So being a part of Acts 29 at DC, we want to be a church which plants churches, and Nations Church is the first church we've been blessed to plant. So do you want to explain for the people who may not understand exactly how that works and how that looks? Because so you've turned up in Australia finally, and we saw you around for a while. You guys and the Prebinos were at DC, coming to church, doing church and doing life with us. But then how does that turn into church planting? What was the process for you and Tiff, and for Rich and Cherie?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, so I think one of the big things with, I guess a couple of the big things for planting are leaders and people, and I guess that's just a big thing for a church to be a church in general. But I guess really kind of getting a feel for what that could look like early on is key. And so those about 6 to 8 months or whatever that I think we were at DC, that was kind of what was beginning to happen, and even before, I should say, because once we chatted with Rich, I think another couple from here connected with him, and then he was able to share at a church that he had worked with in the past in Brisbane, and kind of network a bit to share kind of the vision and all those things. And slowly, kind of one by one, couples or in different people would kind of get connected to him and to what we were planning to do in Forest Lake. And I think once we got to that point of about 10 to 15 people, it was like, okay, let's start kind of coming out of DC, start meeting in Forest Lake, and then begin to build from there. Kind of that birthing process, I guess, where we started to become our own thing. And that just looked like kind of a small group meeting in the home once a week. And we started that in Feb of 2019. And then August, had more couples join us and things like that. And then got to a point where it was like, okay, feels like we would develop better. And I guess philosophically as a church, we wanted to meet on Sundays. We want to have small group ministry as well. And so it was like, okay, we feel like we're at that point now where it's time to develop more as a church and start meeting on Sundays and kept meeting during the week. But hit that point. So we began to do that and kind of form from there.
So what have you noticed in Australia? What's different here than what you're used to? Anything that's really surprised you?
Reasonable people.
Reasonable.
They are here or they aren't?
They are here. They are here, yes.
Good.
Yeah,
Found
you can
some.
just turn on the news and know where the unreasonable people are.
What about other cultural things like the food and, I don't know, the weather? How are those things different for you?
No. I guess in some ways, the food would line up. It's very similar. I think in some ways you get the UK kind of. It's kind of you can kind of see a mix or a feel of both. Yeah. Weather's amazing, absolutely. And I think a lot of times, like for my wife and I both, we kind of go back to or at least I do, I should say. I kind of go back to the UK. But it may be because that was another overseas experience, so I kind of compare it, which the weather is night and day compared to there. But actually, no, it is different in the sense that, like when we were living in Michigan, you kind of got a bit of the four seasons, and it never really got. I mean, it would get cold, you'd get some snow, but it never really got too hot in the summer. But I would say, yeah. So I guess here with the summer and the really kind of summer winter is a bit different, but I feel like we love it. Maybe not so much the summer, the midsummer heat. Although we found this summer better than last, but somebody was like, "Oh, you probably acclimatized a bit," which is nice. But I absolutely love the winter and those cooler summer days. It's been great.
Let's talk about the context. So Forest Lake, and I know you guys are looking at that, that kind of corridor, Inala, Richlands, that kind of area, and they're quite diverse. If you look at that southwest part of Brisbane, can you tell us a bit about the people, some of the people you've met there, and then some of your hopes in terms of reaching the people of that context?
It is. From afar, it seemed like, Inala, Richlands, Forest Lake. And I remember actually maybe 2 years ago, or maybe 2 years before we actually even moved over, we came to visit with Rich and went out with Greg to Forest Lake, to Inala. And that had really been the first time we actually set foot in those places since wanting to plant. And you're kind of like, whoa, these are two very different places, very close, but very, very far away at the same time. And I think that kind of put in our minds that is probably not going to work on one level, not going to work out like how we thought. May not be as broad of a reach early on, at least. And so I think those differences have really kind of pushed us to say, okay, we're here in Forest Lake. If we really want to establish and build roots, we need to just dig in Forest Lake, and then maybe years to come we can branch out. But if we kind of shoot past Forest Lake, because Inala is a little bit more appealing or not appealing, but it tends to be a bit needier of a place, and so there's a lot more you can jump into right away, which can really kill a church plant, to be honest. Because if you're not, it's kind of like parenting. I'm not a parent, but you think if you're trying to parent from an unstable position, you're probably not going to be a great parent. And I kind of feel like that with planting. If we're not really strong and stable, reaching into that community past the community that we're actually meeting in is probably not the best idea. And I guess, those differences I think are, socioeconomic. And it's interesting, even, like Forest Lake's very diverse. I tend to say, and I have no idea if I'm right on this, but they feel very different. But if you're in Forest Lake, like I would say Forest Lake feels very Australian. But if you look at the faces and the people that walk through the shops, it's very, very mixed. But it doesn't feel multicultural at all. It feels, again, very, very Australian. But I would say it's still very diverse. Whereas when you go to Inala, it just multiculturalism just hits you. It's just everywhere, and the vibe and the feel is there, and which I think probably aids in this like planting. We probably just need to focus in one area for now. And then Richlands is kind of an interesting thing. It's just kind of off. This is a little thing off to the side that's developing. And so, but actually as a church, when because we've done some we've done some flyer drops several times, we do include Richlands, partly because it's a lot of apartments and they're just really easy to flyer. But it kind of has a little bit more neutral feel between Forest Lake and Inala. And so we do kind of include that in these early days because we think it's a little bit more accessible in terms of who we are and where we are as a church.
So you said a little while ago, in terms of your ministry, you really enjoy trying to help people see their need for Jesus, who don't know their need. They're not fooled. They don't think they're Christians, or they don't misunderstand. They just don't know it. They just haven't seen it. They haven't heard it. Do you feel like you're being able to step into that space in Forest Lake? How is that ministry going in reaching the people and the community around you?
Yeah. No, I would say the first year has been just a ton of setup. I think we kind of went with the approach of let's really dig the foundation deep early. And so I think for me personally, and potentially of us as a group, we didn't really jump into it and just go mission. We've kind of dug really deep, tried to build a strong community. But I think this year is that year where it's like, okay, we've got these things in place. Now let it spill out into the community, and we're starting to see that. Just yesterday, it was awesome. We were meeting for our gospel community, and Rich had us all pray for somebody that we know that's not a Christian, and what are those next steps in terms of developing that relationship. And everybody had a name, and it was just like, and it's just awesome because we did it split with guys and girls. But you think of there's probably like a handful of guys and say 4 or 5 girls, women. But if you think of like everybody impacting one person, like if everybody had somebody come to faith in the next year or two, we would double as a church off of somebody coming to faith. It's like, man, it is that simple. I mean, it's not that simple because people come to faith takes a long time, but it's interesting because it's like developing and growing as a church. It's like, man, it doesn't really take a few people being rock stars. It's just, people connecting.
Just daily life on life.
Yeah, where they're, And Forest Lake is really interesting because, and maybe this is other suburbs as well, but it's a lot of people just kind of, you live in Forest Lake, you do things in your home, you go out to go to work, drive into your garage, put it down, go in the, so there, especially in Forest Lake, there's just a real lack of community connection. And so that's one way where trying to walk with people, get to know neighbors. My wife and I go to the Snap Fitness, and so getting to meet people there and chat with them. And I think it's one of those things where it's just, well, actually, been thinking about this past couple of days, but it kind of layered in a sense. There's that sense where it's neighbors, it's doing life, which is a kind of longer term view. But then we're also running an SU Easter camp,
cool.
where we kind of want to catalyze and get kind of turn the soil a little bit more than just the kind of neighbor connections. And so we want all these things kind of working in unison. And just last week, there's a rugby club, and I met with the lady. She's the president, I think, and she's a Christian. She said she'd been praying for somebody to take over the canteen, partly because it will help them for funding, but partly that she would like to see a Christian come in because there's just great opportunities to connect. And so was able to kind of step into that role and start that in the coming weeks.
That's cool.
And so there's kind of like those, I always kind of think of it as those tiered layers where that's the SU event is real catalytic. The canteen is a bit longer term, but kind of more medium term where you can really get connections semi-easily. You see them week in, week out at training, and then neighbors and gym, so it's, so that's kind of where we are. And I think people that are with us are starting to have been developing relationships like that. And I think in this coming year, really want to be prayerful and leading out in that way and developing more of those relationships in the community as well.
Yeah, we're excited that you're here and doing God's work in this part of the world, and so we just want to find out different ways we can support you and see God's kingdom grow.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Matt.
If you'd like more information about what's going on at Disciples Church, check out our website.
Or email us at podcast@disciples.org.au if you have any questions or feedback. Thanks for listening in, and we'll see you next week.